So I'm going to show you today how to make a Moroccan chicken, chickpea and honey stew. The great thing about this sort of Moroccan stew is that it cooks for quite a long time in the oven, probably about 2 hours we're going to pop this in for. You could be cooking it in a slow cooker if you wanted to, which will probably go in for about 4 hours. But it cooks with very little liquid. This is the sort of recipe they have in hot countries where the water is scarce. They keep a tight lid on it, but they cook with very little liquid in the actual stew. So first of all, I'm going to put a plug of oil in my frying pan, and I'm going to fry off some chicken thighs, boneless chicken thighs, much cheaper than buying chicken breasts. Let's get that pan nice and hot because we're just going to brown off the outside of the chicken thighs. Let that oil cover the bottom of the pan. I'm actually using a pan here that will go from the top of the cooker into the oven all in one go, but if you haven't got one of those, you can just use a frying pan and an oven-proof casserole dish, something with a lid that fits reasonably tightly on the top. So I'm just going to pop those in here, and then I'm just going to leave them for a few minutes to start browning off the outsides, and we'll come back and turn those over in a minute once they're cooking. Whilst the chicken is cooking away behind me, I've just peeled an onion, which I'm going to chop now to go into the pan. We'll be putting these in once the chicken is just browned on the outsides. I'm going to be using a piece of fresh root ginger today. Now if you don't have fresh root ginger, you can substitute this with just dried ground ginger powder. I like the root ginger. It looks like this when you buy it. It looks like not very much at all, but it's absolutely full of flavour, so be careful how much you put in depending how much you like it. I'm going to use a piece just this sort of size, about a couple of centimetres long today, but try that much. If you like the gingery taste, then you can increase it, but don't put too much in to start with in case you don't like it quite so strong. And I've got a couple of cloves of garlic there, which I'm just going to roughly chop as well. Now you need to chop this ginger quite finely, because if you don't, and somebody gets a mouthful of this in a big bit, they might not like that very much. But we want to chop it nice and finely, so we've got as many edges as possible so that the ginger flavour comes out into the chicken and into the rest of the stew. And then I'm going to finely chop my garlic. Again, if you've got a garlic crusher, you can crush this with one of those. It doesn't matter. If you really like chunky garlic, you can leave that quite big. So my chicken is sizzling away in the background, as you can hear, and in here I've placed half a pint of boiling water with a chicken stock cube, which I've just given a good stir to so that that's well dissolved and ready to go. And the last thing I'm going to do just before we go back and attend to that chicken again is to chop some apricots. Now these give the Moroccan type stew the kind of Moroccan authenticity. They often combine fruit out there with their meat stews, so you could put dates into a stew and other dried fruit as well, and sometimes raisins and things like that. So it's a really nice thing to experiment with. Once you've made it once, then start changing the things that you add, see what you like. It's also a favourite with my children who like the fruit and the sweetness of it. Then we add the honey as well. It creates a lovely caramelly sweety sort of flavour to the stew. So just rough chop those
small bite-sized pieces.
So my chicken is sizzling away in the background, as you can hear, and in here I've placed half a pint of boiling water with a chicken stock cube, which I've just given a good stir to so that that's well dissolved and ready to go. And the last thing I'm going to do just before we go back and tend to that chicken again is to chop some apricots. Now these give the Moroccan type stew the kind of Moroccan authenticity. They often combine fruit out there with their meat stews, so you could put dates into a stew and other dried fruit as well, and sometimes raisins and things like that. So it's a really nice thing to experiment with. Once you've made it once, then start changing the things that you add, see what you like. It's also a favourite with my children who like the fruit and the sweetness of it. When we add the honey as well, it creates a lovely caramelly sweety sort of flavour to the stew. So just rough chop those small bite-sized pieces. I'm just going to turn these chicken thighs over. As you can see, we're using boneless and skinless chicken thighs here, so the aim of this is to just cook off the chicken to seal it on the outside. And just turn that down a little bit, just a bit fierce. You can see that's going nice and golden on the outside. We'll just give it another couple of minutes until the underside is the same, and then we'll add the rest of the ingredients. Now that the chicken is just enough to have taken that pinkiness off from the outside of the chicken, it doesn't need to be any more cooked than that at the moment. And I'm going to just lift it out and leave it on a plate whilst we cook some of the other ingredients. Into the same oil, keep all the flavourings in there as far as possible. Into the same sizzling pan, I'm going to add the garlic, the onions, and the ginger. Just let those cook for a couple of minutes in the pan. You can see a nicely glossy and shining now. They've just softened enough that we can add our chicken back into the pan. So I'm going to pop that in, just arrange it around and space those out. And then I'm going to add some spices in the pan as well. So you can experiment again with your different spices, but I've chosen today to put in the kind of traditional things you'd see in a Moroccan stew. So your smoked paprika, which you've probably got in your cupboard if you've been cooking with us before, because you've used this in other recipes. So I'm putting in a teaspoonful of that. I'm putting a teaspoonful of ground coriander. You can use fresh coriander in this if you want to, and when you finish your dish off, if you happen to have it, you manage to pick it up from somewhere, you can use fresh chopped coriander on the top. And I'm adding a teaspoonful of the ground turmeric as well. Now this adds a lovely yellowy, rich colour to the dish as well. And once you've got your spices in, just rinse that spoon off, make sure everything has gone in there. As you add your stock, half a pint of stock going in there. Make sure you get all of the remains of that stock cube out. Don't worry if it hasn't quite fully dissolved, it will do so in the pan as this cooks now. I'm going to add my chopped apricots into there, and I'm adding now, we've already drained these, the water out of them, but I'm adding now the 2 tins of chickpeas. And then the final ingredient for now is to add the honey. Now this recipe takes 2 tablespoons of honey, and you don't really want to be adding more than that. It's very sweet and it makes the dish taste honey-like with just the 2 tablespoons. And the other thing is you don't really want to be adding more honey, especially if children are enjoying this, because too much of it is not good for teeth. It is a sugary ingredient, and therefore you don't want to be overdoing it, but you do want enough for the recipe. So as I say, 2 tablespoons and no more. So I'm adding that into the pan now. Again, just let your spoon stand so that all of it comes off. Stir it into the warm liquid that's already in the pan. That will help the honey off that spoon. And then give it a good stir around. You can see that chicken is already beginning to take on the yellow turmeric. Give your chicken a turn at this point. You could, if you watched it carefully and added a little bit more liquid when necessary, cook this in a pan on the top of the stove if you wanted to. I prefer to do mine in the oven because I can just forget about it. So I'm putting a nice tight fitting lid on, and that pan is going into the oven, which is on 140 degrees centigrade, and it's going to be in there for a couple of hours. The stew, when it's cooked, I'm going to use couscous. You could use rice, you could serve it with potatoes, but traditionally you would serve it with couscous. So have a read of your packet, because it does tell you the quantities for each person on there. So I'm going to be using 250 grams of couscous, which is enough for 5 people, roughly 50 grams per person. I'll just weigh that out to 250. And then I'm adding to it 350 mils of boiling water, and it really is this simple. Pour your boiling water in. Couscous absorbs that boiling water over a few minutes, so give it a good stir in the dish. And then just be patient and leave that to sit there for 4 minutes. So I've just taken my Moroccan stew out of the oven. Take the lid off here, and as you can see, the tight lid on the pan has kept all of that lovely flavour and juice in there. The chicken is beautifully cooked through, lovely and tender. Chickpeas have gone soft, and those spices and aromatic flavourings have absorbed into the stew. So that now is ready to be served with the couscous.